So 2 weeks ago, I preached a Star Wars-related sermon that drew on the next to last movie, Episode 8. And that sermon was actually written before I had seen the last movie, Episode 9, and I committed that I would come back and give a sermon inspired by that movie. So this is the second in a two-part Star Wars series. So how many people have seen the newest and last Star Wars movie? Episode 9 of a 9-movie saga that has now spanned 42 years. All right, let's keep these hands up for just 1 second. Okay, look around. A lot of you are slacking. A lot of you are slacking. All right? Okay, there's some homework to do here. Well, the good news is, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, there is only one spoiler in today's sermon. We're going to get it out of the way right up front. And I don't think it's really a spoiler because it's been hinted at very blatantly in all the commercials. And the movie itself reveals it in the first 30 seconds. Like, it is literally the first thing you read in the first line of the opening crawl of text that Star Wars movies are famous for. So, spoiler alert, the evil Emperor Palpatine is back. Now, for anyone who is not Star Wars conversant, the Emperor is the big bad guy. Even bigger and badder than Darth Vader himself. He is the evil mastermind behind every bad thing that happens in the Star Wars saga of 9 movies. The Emperor is behind the collapse of the Galactic Democratic Republic. He machinates the end of 1,000 years of galactic peace. He orchestrates the rise of a fascist empire with himself as supreme leader. He seduces young Anakin Skywalker to the dark side and turns him into Darth Vader. He is just generally the worst. And here he is again, back in Episode 9, full of evil schemes and causing trouble. Now, the Emperor in Star Wars is a powerful guy, right? He is strong in the ways of the Force, the dark side of the Force. He does all the Jedi stuff. He can read your mind. He can sense the future. He is no slouch with a lightsaber. He can even shoot lightning out of his fingers, which is something only the bad Jedi can get to do. But the Emperor's most consistent weapon across 9 full-length movies is none of those fancy space wizard magic tricks. He lies. His secret weapon is just lies. And that's what I caught my attention in preparation for this sermon. Throughout all of Star Wars, the Emperor uses lies as his primary tool of spreading chaos and gaining power. And he lies in chiefly 2 ways, which we're going to talk about, because it is very relevant to our world today. The first way he uses lies is to divide people and set them against one another. In the so-called prequel trilogy, movies 1, 2, and 3, the Emperor, working behind the scenes, uses an elaborate set of lies to play 2 groups of people against each other, the Galactic Trade Federation and the Republic. I promise I'm not going to get into the weeds with the details, but the point is he pretends to be friends with both sides. He lies to both sides, and he sets them against each other until this sort of minor conflict becomes a great conflict. He stokes their fear, he stokes their mistrust, until the disagreement becomes a civil war. The civil war then becomes the pretext for an emergency decree which converts the Democratic Republic into a military dictatorship. Right? And Lucas, in writing this plot, was obviously drawing on any number of examples from history, when civil unrest and then civil war give rise to fascism in one form or another, right? We've seen this story plenty of times in the real world. So this is one way the Emperor lies. He uses lies to turn people against one another, sowing mistrust and fear, playing both sides against each other, patiently undermining democratic institutions, social order, social norms, always with his real agenda hidden in the shadows. Now, allow me to bring us back into the real world from a galaxy far, far away. I remember way back in 2015, and doesn't 2015 seem like a million years ago at this point? But 5 years ago, back in 2015, I remember reading this really weird article in the New York Times. It was so strange. and so kind of unbelievable that I remember I actually called my wife, Suzanne, on the phone and was like, I just read the weirdest article in the New York Times. Did you know there's a building in St. Petersburg in Russia where people are paid to sit at computers all day long and just lie on the internet? The article, which you can pull up online still, was called The Agency. It was by Adrian Chen. It was published in June 2nd of 2015, and it described in detail, from an eyewitness account of a citizen activist named Ludmila Savchuk, who was working from the inside, described in detail how hundreds of people were working around the clock in an otherwise totally nondescript office building in St. Petersburg just to spread lies and propaganda on the internet. They were well supported, they were well trained, they were well coordinated, well paid. By one estimate, the operation employed over 400 people and was spending about $400,000 a month just to spread nonsense on the internet. Now, this propaganda operation actually began as an internal affair. What was going on originally was that as Putin and the oligarchs began to consolidate their power within Russia and were constructing this increasingly oppressive government, well, there were counter forces, there were activists, there were protesters, there were people working against this, and they were organizing on the internet. And the internet was a great place for them to get their message out against whatever the government was doing. So pro-government forces responded with this initiative to pay people just to flood the Russian internet with pro-government messages, with really nasty messages, and then just with a lot of nonsense. So much nonsense, so much lies and disinformation and garbage and unpleasantness that eventually the Russian internet became a totally unusable space for activists to get the truth out because no one wanted to be there in the first place and because nothing on it could be trusted. So this was the technique by which the Russian government cut the legs out from underneath the anti-government activists. So, with this machinery in place, the Internet Research Agency, as it was called, then set its sights on foreign interference. Its initial forays into social media manipulation were what we would now call fake news. Fake news. So in 2015, they manufactured breaking news about a chemical plant explosion in Centerville, Louisiana, about an Ebola outbreak in Atlanta, about a police shooting of a black woman, again in Atlanta. All these stories were backed by fabricated live video, by doctored images of newspaper stories from real newspapers, and by phony eyewitness accounts on the internet, people tweeting as though they were live on the scene. And it was all fake, completely fake, designed to tap into real fears, because we were worried about Ebola at that time. And there was a lot of unrest in the news around police shootings, right? So it was designed to tap into real fears and spread confusion and anxiety. By today's standards, these efforts were both remarkably sophisticated and very crude. They were sophisticated in the convincingness of the hoax. There's a lot of money and a lot of expertise that went into these fake stories. But they were crude in the blatancy of the lie, because it's really easy to prove that a chemical plant did not, in fact, blow up in Centerville, Louisiana. And once you know that, right? But these were test cases. These were test cases. This was this agency, this group of people, seeing what they could do and seeing what this worked and putting things out there and seeing how people would respond. Now, we now know that Russia had an agenda to disrupt the 2016 election, and in that election, fake news was part of the strategy, right? They disseminated an enormous amount of just fake news. And some of these stories were quickly and easily disproven, like the Pope endorsing Donald Trump. Some were completely ridiculous. Like Hillary Clinton running a secret child slavery ring out of a Pizza Hut in Washington, D.C. Ridiculous. And all of this nonsense, we know, had an impact. How much of an impact is up for debate? But fake news is only part of the game, and it's a small part of the game. The Russians have a much bigger agenda than the 2016 election. They have a bigger agenda than the 2020 election, although they will certainly attempt to influence that. Their long game is not about the election. Their long game is a systematic attempt to get us to distrust our own institutions. Now, particularly, the free press is an institution that is under attack, right? If you flood the internet with garbage, when every news story is under suspicion, then the truth can just be buried in a fog of mistrust and confusion and misdirection. And sadly, our current administration is only too aware of this tactic and uses it as well, as do other domestic groups, as do other politicians, right? So this has been incredibly disruptive and corrosive to our institutions, the free press being one of our most important institutions. But the Russians and others, other domestic extremist groups now, have a different goal, which is not just about undermining the institution of the press. It is not just confusion that they want to spread, it's hate. It is hate. The long-term goal, the long game, is for us to hate each other. And they do this not by spreading ridiculous fake news stories. They do it by pretending to be ordinary people on the internet and then using social media messages to increase tensions and polarize opinions around controversial issues. For example, since 2014, police shootings of unarmed African Americans have been a very divisive and polarizing issue in this country. It's a real issue that we're grappling with. It's a terrible thing. And when a shooting happens, Russian trolls disguised as American citizens will begin pouring fuel on the fire. Some will post vitriolic denunciations of the police using the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Some will post racist diatribes against black people using the hashtag Blue Lives Matter. The point is to raise tensions and create mistrust and drive people as far apart as possible on every issue. And by this point, they're very good at creating just exactly the message that will get people's attention and confirm their worst fears. Right, researchers studying this particular issue, police shootings, found, for example, that of 20,000 internet accounts that were posting around a particular shooting, on both sides of the issue, 2 of the top 12 most shared accounts were actually Russian trolls. 2 of the top 12. This is from a 2018 Mother Jones article by Denise Clifton. A CNN story, also from 2018, shares this anecdote. In one case, a Russian troll group organized and promoted 2 opposing events on the same day at the same location in Houston, Texas. Heart of Texas, a web page that posed as a pro-Texas secession organization, promoted a Stop Islamization of America protest at the opening of the Library of an Islamic Center on May 21st, 2016. The same troll group used another page, United Muslims of America, to promote a Save Islamic Knowledge event at the same time, in the same place. And the CNN story goes on to detail how other trolls then went on those pages and posted inflammatory messages to get people really angry and really afraid when they arrived on the scene. And real protesters showed up at these fake events on both sides. That is the protest that was engineered by Russian trolls over the issue of Muslims in America. And thankfully, no one was hurt. But you can imagine how a situation like that could get out of hand very quickly. Recent Rolling Stones article from November 25th of 2019 by Darren Linville and Patrick Warren notes that the quality of Russia's work has been honed over several years and millions of social media posts, millions of posts. They have appeared on Instagram, Stitcher, Reddit, Google+, Tumblr, Medium, Vine, Meetup, and even Pokemon Go, demonstrating not only a nihilistic creativity, they say, but also a ruthless efficiency in volume of production. The factory never stops. They attack issues from both sides, attempting to drive mainstream viewpoints in polar and extreme directions. I've never even heard of some of these media programs that they're on, but they're on all of them. They are really good at what they do. They're really good at what they do. And here is the newest wrinkle, also detailed in that Rolling Stone story. Having sown so much anxiety and discord, having found us all in a place of so much just like tension and badness, they're now weaponizing our desire to feel something good for a change. Right? The Rolling Stone article relates how on August 22nd, 2019, just a couple months ago, a woman named Tyra Jackson tweeted a heartwarming image of a professional athlete who was building houses for single mothers. She tweeted this story about this guy, he's an athlete, and what he does in his spare time is he builds homes for single mothers. It's a wonderful story. And people loved it, and they shared it. Tony Dungy, former coach of the Colts, shared it. Like 300,000 people liked it, which is huge in internet terms. And it turns out that Tyra Jackson is a Russian troll, pretending to be a regular person. And the reason that she was sharing this heartwarming message was to build trust. So people would follow her, whoever her is, so that they could get more heartwarming messages, and they would trust the source of this message. And then this same account was later used to spread lots of polarizing stories about police shootings, stories about government failure, stories about whatever it was, designed again to increase anxiety and to push people apart. And I'm going to give you one more example to show how subtle this kind of social media attack can be. This is also from the Rolling Stones article. In fall of 2018, a Russian account called @PoliteMelanie, she's polite, @PoliteMelanie, reposted an old urban legend. This was the post. My cousin is studying sociology at university. Last week, she and her classmates polled over 1,000 conservative Christians. What would you do if you discovered that your child was a Homo sapiens? 55% said they would disown them and force them to leave their home. That was the tweet. That was the tweet she put out, right? Whoever she is, whoever @PoliteMelanie is. The tweet suggested conservative Christians are not only homophobic, but really ignorant. It was subtle enough not to feel like overtly hateful, right? But it was aimed at multiple cultural stress points, right? Religious differences, sexuality issues, driving a wedge right at the point where religion and ideology meet. The tweet was wildly successful. It was shared 90,000 times. It was liked 300,000 times. And the audience for that tweet was educated secular liberals. And the goal of the tweet was to evoke in educated secular liberals a particular emotion, and that is disgust. Disgust is the emotion that they were going for. In this case, for religious conservatives and our stereotypical ideas about how they must be. And the larger goal, because again, the trolls are playing all sides of every issue, is that we all feel disgust for each other. Because if there's an emotion that is particularly corrosive of social cohesion and community, it is disgust. Disgust is very hard to bridge. The larger goal is to destabilize our society and our institutions and increase our anxiety and our anger. Note that these tweets all press on the tension points of our society, right? These new lies are exploiting ancient evils that we have been grappling with for a very long time. Racism, sexism, violence against women, fear of immigrants, homophobia, anti-Semitism, religious intolerance. They reinforce our worst stereotypes of anyone who is on the other side of one of these tension points. They widen the gap between us, and they also distort our perception of the gap itself. Because if it seems like we are so far apart that there's no point in even reaching out to each other, if it seems like dialogue is pointless and human connection is hopeless on this issue, then we won't reach out to each other, and we won't try to make connection. And then what is left but conflict? And ultimately, perhaps even violence. And this is the second way that the emperor lies in the Star Wars movie. The lies of the emperor are used to increase despair and drive false narratives about what is possible. And I noticed in the movie, whenever one of the heroes confronts the emperor in the Star Wars movies, whether it's Luke Skywalker in the old movies or Rey in the new movies, whenever a hero finally confronts the emperor always tells them the exact same lie. You have already lost. You have already lost. The situation you're in is hopeless, and so you should give in to hatred because hatred is the only option you have left. So I went to see this fantasy movie called Star Wars about an evil emperor who uses lies to drive people apart, to spread hate, and undermine democracy. And then here is the truth, the ridiculous truth. We are actually under attack. All of us, everyone here, our country, this shared enterprise we call American society, we are under attack. It's a ridiculous thing to say, right? It sounds like something from a bad fantasy movie, and yet it's true. It's 100% true. And the attacks are words, messages, lies, deliberate, skillfully crafted deceptions, expertly applied spin, spread to us through all of our social media. And the reason that we are susceptible to these lies is because they play on all of these evils that we are grappling with and still have not fully and honestly dealt with. They pick all of our worst weaknesses and they push on those pain points expertly. Now, I'm not saying Russia or even Putin is the evil emperor, right? Geopolitics is not a simple story of good and evil. So the fantasy ends there, right? The global issues are complicated. But what I am saying is that the people who are spreading these lies do not have our interests at heart. They do not wish us well. And it is not just the Russians anymore. Internal extremist groups have seized upon these methods. Other external people have learned these tricks. And the lies they spread are designed to fuel our anxiety, to drain away our hope, to seed mistrust and disgust of one another, and then leave us grasping for hatred as our only option. The attacks did not start with the 2016 election. They're only going to get worse as we enter this 2020 election cycle, and they will not stop with the 2020 election. And of course, lies and spin and propaganda are not new. We get them from our own politicians every day. But what is new is the relentless, ubiquitous, and subtle nature of the campaign that is being waged against us all the time. That is the bad news. The good news is that we have a defense against these attacks, and we practice this defense every Sunday. Because our religious faith, this tradition we call Unitarian Universalism, is our best defense against this kind of attack. Because the ultimate goal of this campaign is to encourage us to dehumanize one another. That's what disgust does. It dehumanizes. And Unitarian Universalism forbids dehumanization. Right? Our first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person, As such, Unitarian Universalism encourages us to be curious about one another. It invites us to be compassionate with one another, and it challenges us to be kind to one another and to continue to listen even when we disagree. And we will disagree. Of course we will. Right? We will have strong substantive disagreements with one another. What are the issues that these tweets are pressing on? Racism, homophobia, economic insecurity, religious tolerance, women's rights. We have strong substantive disagreements in our society about these issues. And we need to confront them. And we need to hold up a vision of justice that does challenge each other. So I'm not arguing, and Universalism does not argue for some treacly notion that we can all just get along if we agree to set aside our differences. We won't agree. We don't have to get along. We don't even have to like each other, right? We do have to live side by side, and we are called to love one another, which is not the same thing as liking one another at all. And if we continue down the road where we stereotype and dehumanize one another as right-winger and left-winger, conservative and liberal, right, deplorable and snowflake, then we will only continue to widen the chasm between us until the rift we have created threatens to split us asunder. As a practical matter, I would say be suspicious of messages that are designed to polarize. Be on guard against messages that confirm the exact stereotype that you already have of whoever the message is talking about, right? The attacks we face are designed to play on our existing prejudices and to amplify them. So if you read something and you find yourself saying, well, isn't that just like so-and-so to be that way, right? Then stop and be curious about that. Look for counterexamples, right? Look for counterexamples. That doesn't mean paper over genuine differences and disagreements, but no group of people is monolithic, right? People are complex and surprising. So challenge your own stereotypes about how people are. Look for points of common interest and shared values. If we can't agree on all things, what can we agree on? If we can't work together on this issue, what is an issue where we might work together? Be curious in general about the people around you. Spend less time on the internet where the attacks are occurring in the first place, and more time making real human connections in diverse communities. And I want to acknowledge that I am speaking from a place of privilege as a straight white male, and that it is not necessarily safe physically or emotionally for marginalized or otherwise vulnerable people to engage with the people who marginalize or threaten them. So when I say enter diverse communities, engage with the people who challenge you, that is easier said than done for some people, which means those of us with privilege have a special obligation to enter the spaces that others cannot and have the difficult conversations that need to be had there. Now, I won't give away the ending to Star Wars. And I don't know the ending to this story, the one that we're all living through. But I believe that getting to an ending we can all live with is going to require great reserves of the very thing that are under attack. Our ability to trust one another, our openness to unexplored possibilities, our willingness to engage in dialogue even when it is difficult, our ability to imagine and work towards a shared future together. And above all, we need hope. Because the greatest lie and the last lie is that there is no hope. As we move through these challenging times, let us keep our wits about us and let us keep hope alive in our hearts. With love, there is always hope. Did you know people call UUs sometimes the love people? That's how we're known outside these walls, the love people. With love, there is always hope. So let's keep hope alive in our hearts. Let us continue to do the work that love calls us to do, and let us witness to the possibility of a better world for all of us, where we all share it together. May it be so, and amen.